Howdy, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Hope y'all doing okay. So, I had something on my mind that's just, it's one of the things that's not really been on my mind anything any more than usual, but something that bothers me sometimes. Now, I want to preface this. I love my wife and my kids. I wouldn't trade them for anything. They bring me so much joy and happiness and contentment, and seeing the kids grow up, there's a lot of satisfaction in seeing them mature into better people than they were. And there's a lot of humor in it when they spat stuff back at you that's the same stuff you say, especially if it's the kind of thing where they should be in trouble but they make you laugh. But all that said, the people that you love the most do have the ability to frustrate you the most. So I'll give you a case in point example. The 3 times that I have been the most frustrated with kids that were mine, oddly enough, the top 3 all oddly involve my son. Great kid. This was when he was much younger. There was one time shortly after my wife and I met, and I was helping him get in her car. We were dating at the time, and I was picking him up to put him in his car seat, and he proceeded to kick right below the belt buckle. And I was pretty irritated about that. Another time, we had gone to church, and this was the church that we went to. It was different from most of the churches I've been to. One of the ways it was different is every Sunday morning there was a woman, and she had someone always help her, and they would set up coffee, tea, hot chocolate, water, and finger foods. And the whole church was in kind of like a small warehouse building. So the floors were just polished concrete, and you could take whatever you were munching on right into the service. And so you'd be listening to the message and the preaching while snacking on cheese and crackers and salami and whatever else. Well, this one time, my son, he had a handful of things on his plate. He's munching away, and he goes, "I'm done." Real quiet. Okay. Well, we were going to church with my parents back then. They attended the same church. And so Mom had to get up and go to the restroom, and so I hand her his plate because he's sitting in my lap, and I said, "Can you take this and put it in the trash?" Middle of the sermon, preacher's up there, everyone's being real quiet, just hush hush. And my son, as soon as she steps up with his plate, goes, starting to cry, and I clapped my hand over his mouth. I didn't hurt him, but I clapped my hand over his mouth just to quiet him down so he doesn't disrupt everything. And he proceeds to very violently snot all down the backside of my hand. And that's one of those things where you just look at the chain of events and think to yourself, I'm an idiot. I should have gotten up with him initially and just taken him outside and figured it out. He apparently wanted another bite of something. as it stands, I had to go out anyway to go wash my hands. Well, I said all that to kind of say that, you know, a lot of movies don't portray love stories as being accurate. You know, I am deeply in love with my wife, but there is more to it than just surface level love. You know, and this is none of this is a dig at my wife or even a dig at me, because I'll be honest, my wife and I, we have both caused each other headache and heartache and problems, but we've also been the person that's always in the other person's corner. And I know she's always got my back no matter what. And she knows I've always got her back. So, give you a case in point example of this. A couple years ago, my wife called me while I'm out. I was cutting grass or something. She goes, "It's not safe for me to be in this house." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I can't be here right now. I'm having problems." And she's got a lot of, she's formally diagnosed with PTSD, has some other mental health issues. She is medicated due to that. But she's like, "I think I'm going to hurt somebody if I stay at this house. I already called." She was seeing a therapist at the time. And I said, she's like, "I'm going to drive." I've called my therapist. She set up everything. I'm going to go here and get checked in for a few days. I'm like, "No, don't you do that." I said, "You give me 20 minutes, I'll be home. And I'll drive you there. That way you don't, you're not driving by yourself, and we'll figure up picking you up whenever you get out. But I'd rather you not drive if you're in harming others or self-harm frame of mind." I go pick her up, and I literally got to spend, after we got there, because they were real quick to get to the door, like a minute with my wife. You know, just kind of like I didn't get to go in, didn't get to meet nobody, didn't get to say, didn't get to figure out the rough outline of the plan or anything. And I went outside, leaned on one of the pillars outside under the awning, and cried for a minute. And that was a very rough commute home. And my wife's had a handful of trips to the ER since we've been together for varying things. One time both of us were very clumsy, and she thought she fractured her arm. I've had 2 trips to the ER since we've been together. Once I thought I broke my nose, and I had blood down to my legs. I was wearing shorts. I had blood on my legs. I got blood all over the seat of my mower, blood all over the trailer. I was out cutting grass. Blood all on the inside of my truck. And I learned a valuable lesson that day. You never start out a phone call with your wife with the words, "Don't panic." I was out cutting grass. This property had been neglected. They were doing construction out there, had equipment and parts for a building and everything all over, and they didn't want to cut because it was very likely I was going to run over something. Okay, fine. So when they finally had me out there, it's mid-season. This is a very well naturally irrigated stretch of property, and so everything that was there grew like wildfire. I'm out cutting grass, and there's part of it where it's down by this little creek where it's just grown up so thick that it's just laying over, and I'm only cutting about half of it up. And this stuff is in places as tall as I am, and I'm 6'4". And so this mower's cutting for all it's worth, and it's still leaving a few feet of stuff that's bent over at an angle and halfway chopped up. And so I'm like, well, that ain't gonna work. So I turn around and go over it the other way, and it'll bust it up and suck it up in the deck and shoot it out. Okay, we're doing good. Well, when I did that, there's sticks, these iron reeds about yay big around at the base, that are poking up over the front of the mower until the deck hits them and bends them back over. And so they're coming up over my knees and then getting bent back over. Okay, no problem. One of them went straight up my left nostril. And this mower, I was not going fast, but I'm still going, between 3 and 5 miles an hour. And it goes straight up my left nostril. I reach up, grab it, yank it out, and just blood pouring out of my nose. And I'm yelling, I broke my nose, And the funny thing is, I never stopped the mower. I never stopped moving. So I'm holding my nose, I turn the deck off, I drive straight up to the truck, get pulled on the trailer. I'm a half a mile from this hospital. And thankfully, there was room for me to park that truck with a trailer on it at the hospital, because they do not have a large parking lot. They've got a small parking structure. So I had to finagle this truck up into a parking garage, and I'm thankful that there was enough room left up there for me to whip that rig back around. It's not a big trailer, but in a parking garage, every foot counts. And I've got a full-size F-150. It's 4-door, 4-wheel drive with a 12 or 16-foot trailer behind it, I think. One or the other. I think it's a 12-foot. 12-foot deck, 6-foot wide. Yep, that's what it is. So, I call her when I get in the truck, and I tell her, like, look, don't panic, I'm heading to the hospital. She's like, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And she was, and I'm like, don't go doing all that, I'll be okay, I'm fine, here's what happened, and I'm aware, awake, hurting a little bit, but I only want to go to make sure I didn't tear anything deep down in my sinus that they need to put back together, or that nothing got left up in there when I yanked it out and doesn't set up infection. Well, I couldn't talk her out of it. She come down there anyway, but I walk into the hospital, and the triage nurse sees me. I'm covered in blood. She just goes, walk with me. And I don't know if it was just due to the fact that they weren't busy, or the fact that I looked like I'd just been in a bar fight with someone a little bigger than me. But I was in a room in 5 minutes. And the only reason it took them even that long is because they took my blood pressure and vitals and a handful of other stuff, just getting the, how did this happen? I said, you won't believe me if I tell you, and I guarantee you won't hear this one again. Oh, try me. I bet I've heard it before. No, you haven't. No one there had heard that. But anyway, so that was one of my trips to the ER. The other one was fairly recently. I caught my son flying at me at full speed. I was sitting on the couch putting my boots on, and he's a great kid, but he is a poster child for ADHD. And during NTI, he hadn't had much ability to run all that off, so he came running at me full speed, and I caught a knee right to the stomach. And as the next night went on, it just started hurting bad. Like, I couldn't bend without it hurting, I couldn't sit without it hurting. And so I was at work, and I told him, I'm like, look, this ain't gonna work. I got to get out of here. And so they sent me for imaging and found out what had happened. He had essentially bruised my intestines. But, and then, we've had March of 2020, my daughter, her inhaler had expired. She's got asthma, and she's got a rescue inhaler. She doesn't use it that often, and apparently she doesn't use it enough for her to even go through it before it expires. So she takes her inhaler with an attack, and she can't breathe. Okay, we'll take it again. Nope, no dice. So we start driving to the ER, and this was right when COVID was getting pretty serious in my state. And so we start driving her to the local ER. And it gets worse. And so we start driving a lot faster to the local ER. In the car that my wife has literally owned for like 24 hours. And I'm beating the snot out of this thing out on back roads. And I'm like, man, I understand why they use these vehicles for police cars. Then we had another one of my other kids had a absence seizure. Got real quiet in the back of my car. My wife was out running some errands and whatnot while I was asleep. Came to, didn't know who she was, where she was, who her mother was, where she, like, and this was when she pulled up in the driveway. Couldn't name her dog. Didn't know who her grandmother was when she walked out. So I throw some clothes on real quick and we start flying up to the children's hospital in our state. And the wildest thing happened. We're legit 10 minutes outside the hospital. It's a bit of a hike from where I live to get up there, but I was shaking a leg a little bit. But we're 10 minutes from when we got there, and it's like someone just flipped a light switch. Like, I'm asking her, like, because my wife sat in the back seat with her. I'm like, you know who that is? And she's, no, I don't. Do you know who I am? No. Do you know your puppy's name? No. And so we were nervous, but heading to the hospital. And the only reason I drove her myself is because A, the ambulance cost $500. B, it takes them at least 15 minutes to get there, to get to my house. And that's a 15-minute head start I got without a siren. And since she was still, breathing okay, and, still had a good color and everything else, I didn't see the point in it. And I can beat that ambulance every time, just about, so long as they don't need medical care en route. Well, we're 10 minutes outside the hospital, and it's like someone flipped a light switch. And all of a sudden, she's just sitting there. She goes, Mom, I don't know why we're up here. Why are we in Daddy's car going here? Doesn't Daddy have to work today? And just 90 miles an hour, just talk. Normal for that kid. And so all of a sudden, do you know who I'm? Your mommy. Duh. What's your puppy's name? Shelby. Big silly dog. Just on and on and on and on and on she goes. Get up there, and they can't find anything wrong. And they send her home in like 24 hours. Fantastic news. But just the stuff that you go through in married life. And my wife and I have had to go to marriage counseling. We had to trying to figure out how to put this delicately for YouTube, rekindle the flames, as it were. And I love her deeply, but you're in a committed relationship where you have mutually agreed to stay together forever, and both people in that relationship have flaws. I know I do. And on top of that, in our case, you throw in children, which are flawed. I love them to death, but every person has a handful of flaws. So and my wife and I have had some absolutely wonderful romantic moments, but the romance stories that you hear everywhere, and even that I'll post on Facebook, don't capture the ups and downs and ins and outs of a marriage. Even when mine and my wife's relationship, when we rekindled old flames and whatnot, with that, it was around that time that my daughter had that absence seizure. It was around that time that My wife ended up going into the mental facility for a couple days. So even when things are good in one way, they can be bad in another way. And when things are bad in one way, they can be great in another way. I tell you, the one thing that I've learned about being an adult is that money does not mean as much as people think it does. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm all about, having slack in the budget and having money in the bank in case of. It's something that my wife and I are working on together, is more financial stability. But the thing about it before my wife and I got together, I was in a very serious relationship with another woman. And no kids in that, more slack in the budget, the ability to do more things. But I was not very happy at that point in time. Fast forward a year from that point in time, my wife and I are getting married, and we are broke. I'm on a first name basis with two collectors. I never programmed anyone's number into my cell phone, but I answer the phone and say, "Hey, how are you doing today, dear? Which one is it?" And it was a car note. I didn't have expensive cars, but I had 2 car payments, and so I'd answer the phone and say, "Which one is it?" "Well, here's when I can get you some money." And I'd pay her on payday and struggle the rest of the pay cycle to figure out how to make ends meet and try to keep the electric on and everything else. But during that time, my wife and I were so close because all we had was each other. There was no money to lean on and no serious help as far as income goes. So it was an amazing time, and we've had a barrel of money in the bank, and we've had no money in the bank. But it doesn't affect the day-to-day as much. So long as you can afford your bills, once you've got extra money, it doesn't change that much in your relationship or your life, unless you're talking, you can hire staff for your house and buy a Ferrari and have a vacation home and never have to work again. But I'm talking just, I guess working class wealthy. But it's just amazing the things that I've learned in life, being married and in different income statuses over the years. But I would not swap any of it for anything. I love my family dearly, and my mom and I sometimes will sit down, we'll have real interesting discussions about things in her past, my past, what we would have done different. And it's funny, there's things I would change if I knew they wouldn't change everything else. One of my, and here's like a case in point story, and then one of the actual discussions Mom and I had, one of the things I did, and it's one of my rules that I've got now. The vehicle that you're making a payment on isn't a toy. And what I mean by that is like, okay, you can have a car that has a practical purpose. The one I'm in right now, it has a practical purpose. I'm making a payment on it. I have to keep, full coverage, low deductible insurance on the vehicle. And its purpose is to drive me to and from work and get good fuel mileage. That's why I bought it. Now, there's aftermarket speed parts for these. I know it's a little tiny 1-liter EcoBoost, whatever car, but there's performance parts for it in the handling department and in the performance department. You can add 75, 80 horse to this engine if you do all the things. But I haven't done any of that. It's not a toy. It's to drive me to and from work. The Mustang's a toy. If I grenaded the engine in it tomorrow, I'm not making a payment on it while trying to figure out how to fix it. A number of years ago, I bought myself a little 4-wheel drive, extended cab, flare side bed, white Ranger. It was a 0203. I loved this little... It was funny. I thought they were stupid trucks. I really did. Because for the money, you know, when you're comparing close in options, close in miles, close in year, you could buy an F-150 for similar money, have more room, more towing capacity, more cargo capability, and close in fuel mileage. I thought they were stupid trucks. But I had always been side hustling, and so I decided, you know, I've got this old SUV that I bought real cheap. Got a bunch of miles on it, got a couple problems with it. I want to buy a 4-wheel drive. That's all. I don't care what it is. I want to buy something 4-wheel drive to pull my mowing business with. That's all I wanted. So that if I get that mower hung up, I can get it out myself instead of having to call Dad to come out and rescue me. So I was working at the dealership at the time, and I'm keeping an eye on what's coming in on trade, and even the other lots that were owned by our owners. They owned all the Mopar stuff. I know it's like Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, but the Dodge dealer, Toyota, Nissan, Hyundai, Mitsubishi, Ford. A couple of those were in the same buildings. But you could buy any trade-in off of there for cheap on, you know, just a couple $100 over what they had in it. And so I was keeping an eye out on stuff, and guy traded in this real clean little Ranger that I bought. And I hadn't had a 4-wheel drive vehicle at this point in 8 years, 7 years. And so I'm, you know, oh, cool, I can, you know, put it in 4-wheel drive and go up this hill or go through this construction zone, or, you know, I can do this stuff. And one day I'm just out goofing off. I was out visiting a friend of mine. He lived out in the middle of nowhere, kind of, and so I'm out visiting him, and I see a little dirt path that runs off the road heading out to his place. Stop the truck. I can fit down there. Turn off the road, 4-wheel drive, down the road we go. It goes kind of down this little trail. It's a little uneven, a little rocky. You might have picked up a wheel in the back or something. You go under a train trestle, under an interstate, and then into a creek that you can run up and down both ways for a little bit. So I drive up one way and it gets real rocky, and I bottom out a little bit, back out of that, get turned around, go down the other way, and it just gets too deep. The water does. And I'm like staying close to the creek banks and stuff, so I'm not getting real crazy. Well, anyway, went off-roading in this thing a handful of times, got it caked in mud, you know, just having fun. And I told my dad, I found this great place to off-road. I'd like to get me an off-roading buddy and jack this truck up, get some bigger tires on it, and you know, go out off-road. And he's like, don't do that. Don't do that. And I'm like, why? He's like, you're going to tear that truck up and you're making a payment. And I'm like, no, I'll be fine. And I'd fallen just so in love with this truck. I thought they were stupid trucks, but I bought it, and I fell in love with it. And it's still the old Rangers from 94 I think, is when they changed the body style to whenever they quit making them back in 2011-12. In my opinion, they were stupid trucks. Mine had the big V6 in it, automatic, four-wheel drive. Automatic transmissions in them were garbage. They'd always go out. The engines in them, you had all the towing capability and performance of a V6 with all the fuel consumption of a V8. So they sucked on gas. But I just loved it. I loved the way it rode. I loved the way it drove. I loved the way it felt sitting in it. Just something about the way they built them Rangers. They got something right for just the feel of it. I love that little truck. But Daddy's, don't go doing that. Don't go doing that. Well, I had my ex's girlfriend at the time, niece and nephew in the truck with me. We're coming back. Hey, I'll show you this, kids. And so we go back there and we're cutting around in this creek because it was kind of on the way home from picking them up, and they were staying the night, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I go down this creek and I get to where it gets real deep, and I'm like, okay, this is as far as we can go this way. Put the truck in reverse, was going to back up to the creek bank and turn around. When I put the truck in reverse, the front wheels spun in the silt and sunk. And I sucked water into the engine. I got water in the engine, transmission, transfer case, inside the cylinders, inside the oil pan, inside the differentials, inside everything, and inside the cab. And this thing cost me, I don't even know how much money I spent on this thing over the years, because I got it running, which cost a couple $100 in fluids and spark plugs and filters and whatnot. I took it to the dealer, parked it inside storage. I gutted the interior, minus the dash, cleaned every electrical connector I could get my hands on without taking the truck completely apart, and still had problems. Four-wheel drive module went out. The four-wheel drive shift motor went out, oddly enough, while I was driving it, and it decided right then would be the time to shift into 4-low while I'm driving along. And so for 2 weeks, I drove that truck stuck in 4-low, the 2 miles that I had to commute back and forth to work. So the thing that was wild is the truck did have a governor in it. I didn't know this till then. And the governor was at like 93 miles an hour. And so driving from work down a 45 mile an hour speed limit zone, I'd be showing 93 miles an hour because the truck didn't realize it was in 4-low. And I'd be barely keeping up with 45 mile an hour traffic. I'd have to get in the slow lane. And I know everyone's cringing when I say this kind of crap, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So I took the shift motor off the truck and just forced it back into 2-wheel drive. Then I replaced the shift motor and the window regulators, a bunch of regulators and fuses, got the corrosion in them, and just on and on and on and on. And I learned my lesson. Don't off-road your payment. And, you know, I got talking with my mom about that, you know, and there's a Star Trek episode, one of the guys is able to go back in time and change a critical decision so he lives longer. And that one critical decision affected his whole life. He was no longer who he was. He was a different person who always plays it way more safe. And, you know, we got talking about that. You know, what would you do if you could change one thing in your past? And I wouldn't have wasted time on my ex. I said, but if I wouldn't have wasted time on her, who knows if I would have met my wife. And I love her that much, and I love my family that much that I have with her, that I wouldn't save myself the headache, heartache, and stress of hanging out with a bad woman for me. I'm sure she's a good woman for somebody, but a bad woman for me for 3 years, I wouldn't trade that, because I knew what I had when I met my wife, and I knew I wanted to stay with her. So I know this is kind of running long. I'm talking about everything. I'm giving you a review on Ford Rangers and philosophy and marriage and everything all in one. So I know it's kind of long. I'm sorry for being so long-winded, but I'm pulling into my parking spot in the driveway, so I'm going to end kind of abruptly. Y'all take care. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.